Utah Main Street Media Radio. And we have a great guest with us. This is the Liberty Moms Show. Liberty Moms are the original Secretaries of Defense. We have an amazing Liberty man that is on our show with us today, and I'm super excited to have him. His name is Austen Hepworth. He is an excellent attorney. He is licensed both in Utah and California. He's currently running on the independent ticket as a candidate for the Utah Attorney General. He has worked in many areas of law, including constitutional, business, tax, estate planning, civil litigation, and he has a deep understanding and appreciation for America and the truths that made it great. He has also authored legal briefs at every level of the federal courts and Utah courts, and he has drafted and helped pass legislation in the state of Utah. That's where I met him and have worked with him on that. He graduated summa cum laude and first in his law school and undergraduate class, and he graduated as valedictorian of his high school. You will soon be able to understand why. He is very brilliant. He was homeschooled from third grade to the ninth grade. Then he also served a mission for the LDS Church in Taiwan, and he learned Mandarin Chinese. And he has his own law practice, and he works tirelessly and endlessly to help others keep America the land of liberty. And with that, we welcome you, Austen. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dalane. I'm
Austen,
super excited to be here.
What's that?
Said I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you. We know you're so busy, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us today. You have so much to do. And I just want to be sure and cover, and we will get into this more as time goes, but you decided to run for Utah AG. Do you want to tell us why you decided to enter this race?
Yeah. So the Attorney General's office serves an important role from what I see and from a liberty perspective. I believe strongly in checks and balances, and I felt that our founders set up this country to have checks and balances. When I look at Utah and what's going on in the state nationally, one of the things I see happening is a breakdown in checks and balances. And that ultimately leads to more corruption, more problems, more issues. And so as I looked at what we can do about it, I looked to the places where checks and balances should be. And in looking at the Attorney General's office, I realized we elect a member of the governing party to police the governing party. And if you have the Jazz and the Lakers playing, for example, and the Lakers get to choose the refs, we know that there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And we don't allow it in sports. We don't even allow it on Wall Street. If you were audited, it's independent auditors that come in. But for some reason in politics, we vote to say, oh yeah, we should have the party police itself. But the AG should be this independent office that acts as a checks and balance by enforcing the law. And so I decided to run to say we can restore some checks and balances by having independence there. So I am outside the parties. I'm very conservative in nature, but I am a big believer in enforcing the law as written and in the rule of law, because that helps us not be ruled by kings or monarchs. It's once the law is there, it should be what governs, and everyone should be accountable to it, elected or not. And so that's a summary of some of what I saw, but I think there's a lot of potential for us to really shape Utah in a healthy, productive way by having an independent attorney general.
Wow, Austin, that was phenomenal. That was an excellent lesson, short little snippet on the Constitution, in the separation of powers, checks and balances. And the AG has so much power over our lives, where they have 300 attorneys in the office, 600 employees, and they have so much power over our personal lives. I don't think we all realize that. So I do believe that the AG is one of the very most important offices that we elect. And so that is just one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on and talk today. So there is so much happening in the courts, and I see the courts as kind of, we tend to, as a nation and definitely as a state, I see that we kind of think like the Supreme Court is almost like the king. They're the end all be all. Whatever they say, then that's law. That's how it is. And that isn't the design. And there have been a lot of rulings come down from the Supreme Court. And so I wanted to talk about some of those issues. And I think we'll start. And I know we won't have time to get to all of them, but we will have you on again to finish addressing. But one of the issues that I think is an important issue is how schools use no trespass letters to take away parental rights. To give a parent no, you cannot trespass on public school property, even to a parent who has children in the school, and to say you can't trespass, and how this process violates due process. They don't even say why. They just say you got a no trespassing letter, and it doesn't state why or what the violation is. Could you address this for us?
Yeah, I think it's a very important issue to know about, because ultimately, when we talk about state government, local government, this is the level of government that impacts us in our day-to-day life quite a bit. The federal government certainly does things that are important. They have defense, national defense, for example, but we don't see that rub on a day-to-day basis quite often.
Except for inflation. We see the inflation that's happened by the federal government.
Yeah, and that even is questionable as to what is the Treasury really? Is it part of the government? Is it a private thing?
Right.
That is a whole nother debate.
It's another topic. Yes. Sorry.
But no. But and there certainly are some federal things, and increasingly we see the federal government more coming into our lives. But the cities we live in, the zoning, a lot of these things are shaped by our local officials. And what's happening, it's almost, I don't know if there was just a time when schools figured this out, or if it's always been this way and I just learned about it in the last few years. But what's happened is that when school officials, so I back up a little. Certainly for school officials need the ability to keep kids safe. And so what Utah has kind of given them is, Utah says if you come onto school property when you receive notice from the school that you can't be there, then you can be arrested for criminal trespass. Now, when I read the law, it appears to me to be intended to be protecting safety of children. So,
right.
If there's someone walking around with some guns outside or something, and the school says you're not allowed to be here, get off the property, or whatever it is, some erratic person or whatnot, it gives the police ability to pick them up and have some balance there. But the law is written really loose, and it doesn't say that the school can only issue them in terms of student safety. And so what starts happening is these schools, when they get annoyed with a parent, they can issue, the district will just send a letter to say you're not allowed on school property anymore. And if you do, we're going to arrest you. And the police generally doing their job, because the law says, if the school's given notice, arrest them. Police dutifully do their job and they arrest these parents. But what this means is, so for example, there was a mom that her son was, or her child was being bullied at school. And she would show up every day and say, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And she felt the school wasn't being responsive. Now, maybe from the school's perspective, she was over the top. I don't know exactly what both sides of the situation were. But from the mother's perspective, she was being very protective of her child, trying to get the school to do something. And the school issued her a letter that said, you're not allowed on school property anymore. And if you show up again, we'll arrest you. And this means that you can't attend children's sporting events, you can't attend children's plays, you can't drive onto the property to pick your child up. They have to walk to the outside of the property. You can't go to parent-teacher conferences. And so there's a serious loss of parental rights in association with their children when they get one of these letters. And these letters will be issued to people who, discussed masking policies during COVID, attended different board meetings, and voiced opposition to different things that were going on. And some of them weren't always entirely appropriate. There were some that got letters that probably got a little carried away. But there were others that got letters that, from everything we could see, were peaceful. But the school didn't want to deal with them. And to me, the concern is, from a due process perspective, if you're going to have a loss of rights, the Constitution guarantees that you don't lose liberty interests or associations with your children until there's been notice, opportunity to be heard, for example, the judge should be the one saying, yeah, Austen, you're a threat. You shouldn't be there. But if the government can say, we have your children, but you're not allowed to touch them, you're not allowed to see them, hands off during this time, and that's it. Your only option as a parent at that point is to file a lawsuit and seek to challenge it on some type of constitutional basis or something, but it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and it's not, to me, it's very, it's a very serious infringement on our constitutional rights. And it's disheartening to me when these things happen and we don't see any correction come from our attorney general or others. To me, there should be a very strong correction that comes in that says, no, you can't do this. If you're going to issue a no trespass letter, hold a hearing, put that in place, give them, if it's a safety issue, give them the 10 days or whatever to go through that. But these are just indefinite. You're just trespassed and you can't come out of the school property. So that is one high level of concern for me. I see more and more of these things happen where local officials are more dismissive of rights or laws, and there's not much that happens to correct them from the AG's office. And again, this is where I go back to the independent referee to say, well, if we let the party police itself, it will naturally grow more problematic because you don't have an incentive to make the party look bad.
No.
And this isn't saying that the party's bad or anything. It's just to say over time, that's what happens without proper checks and balances. Teams that don't have refs calling fouls will start to foul more. It's just the way it goes. So,
yeah, we all need to be kept in check. We all need to have accountability. It's an important principle. And yeah, when there's no incentive, I mean, that's why when we have these riots and the burning down of cities, because there was no accountability and law enforcement just said, we're going to let them burn it down. So there's no incentive to govern themselves well because they were literally being rewarded or given a blank check to just go and tear down the community. So it's not hard to figure out what the consequences of that are going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. The laws are there for a reason. And again, there are some bad laws. I'm not saying all laws are good, but many of the laws were passed for a reason. And the Constitution especially exists to say, no, you can't just have your rights taken away without a hearing, without an impartial judge on the other side. The founders knew very well the abuses that could come.
Yes.
And it certainly breaks my heart, these parents that say, I can't even go to my kid's soccer game or my kid's football game. Going, yeah, you have to fight it in court or negotiate with the school and try and get them to agree. And so sometimes the schools have said, okay, we'll let you come to a sporting event or something. But sometimes they don't. And there's parents that get arrested. And I just say, this isn't how we want to live as a country.
It's totally un-American. And not having due process, that is somewhere schools don't seem to honor the due process, and child protective services is another area that I would like to talk to you about sometime, and not today because we don't have time, but it's just bringing up there's another area that just doesn't seem to answer to any of us or have due process. So, okay, I'm sorry.
Just to say that is a pretty serious issue as well with child protective services.
It is very serious. Okay, so another issue that I have heard about, and I have not spent a great deal of time doing the research on this, but I've heard about this Corporate Transparency Act. And I'd like you to just kind of tell us a little bit about that and where you stand on that.
Yeah, so the Corporate Transparency Act was a federal law passed in 2021. It was overwhelmingly supported by both parties, Republicans and Democrats. And there was only a handful of people that voted against it. Mike Lee did vote against it, but all of our other Utah representatives voted for it in the House and Senate. And to be fair, it was one piece of a very large bill. So there was a lot in the bill besides just this act, which is typically how federal laws go.
Right. Yes.
But the Corporate Transparency Act says, the federal government says, hey, we're having such a hard time tracking money launderers and terrorists. that we need to have more information to be able to identify who these bad people are. And so they came out and said, we're going to ask, or not just ask, we're going to require small business owners in America to give us information about themselves and those that they closely associate with. And the way that they do it is they say, you have to report to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, every person who has ownership in your entity or every person who can directly or indirectly substantially control your entity. Now, there's some serious issues with understanding who can indirectly substantially control an entity. Does that include my wife? If I talk to her about things, can she, is she a indirect substantial control of my entity? Is that a good friend? What if a big client says, I'll only take you if you do this, X, Y, or Z. And so when it comes down to compliance, it's very difficult. But the small business owner is required for every person that can identify as being a reportable person. They're supposed to give FinCEN, which is basically the FBI of financial crimes, the driver's license or passport of every person that can indirectly substantially control their entity, the address, the full legal name, birth date type thing. And if that information changes, they're supposed to update it within 30 days of a change.
Oh my goodness.
If you don't do it, then the fines are up to $500 per day, which is an insane amount of money very quickly, and up to 2 years in prison.
Oh my goodness gracious, Austen, are you serious?
I'm very serious. This is not something that, unfortunately, I wish it was a joke, but it's
That's
not.
horrifying. That is horrifying. That's how you turn law-abiding citizens into criminals.
Correct.
This is exactly what they're doing, is turning law-abiding business owners, entrepreneurs who are thinking, there's been a change. The first thing I'm going to do is be sure and let the federal government know about this minor change in my operations. Yeah.
Correct.
As if I don't have anything else to do while I'm running my business and trying to survive.
Yeah. And if you think about it too, you just go, when you move a house, how long does it take you to update your driver's license address?
Exactly.
And you're supposed to update your address within 30 days of that move. And if you don't, $500 a day potentially in fines. In addition, if one of your people moves, you're supposed to update that. You may not even know if one of your managers moves.
Exactly. And Austen, there are so many. You got to change your business license. You got to contact corporations division. There's just so many that you have to do, that if you've got employees and you have all of that to do. There is so much. It's so top heavy with the government in controlling my businesses, that it just is honestly so top heavy. It is so hard to run a business in America in this day and age. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's one I have a lot of sympathy for, because I do run my own business.
And you do, yes.
It is very difficult to have the time to comply with everything that's required.
And you have an employee. I know you've got to have at least one.
Yeah, and even with employees, it's still
it
becomes that much more complicated, because then you have all the withholding filings and this filing and whatever. There's so many things you have to
do. Yeah. Wow.
And so, but the sad thing is, this gets worse with the Corporate Transparency Act, because the federal government is authorized to share the information you send with other federal agencies for law enforcement purposes. And in addition, they're authorized to give this information to foreign countries for law enforcement purposes as well.
What?
And so if we look at a couple examples of things that are happening right now, Representative John Curtis ran a bill in the federal government to impose sanctions on China or something. I don't know exactly what his bill was. Something related to countering what China was doing with some things. China declared him to be a terrorist or something, and they've issued a warrant for his arrest. So if he flies to Hong Kong, if he flies to China, he could be arrested. And so his travel now cannot go to those areas. But if you think about it, what if you're a small business owner associated with John Curtis and you get reported as being one of these people associated with him? What could China do to you then?
Right.
You may not even know. You fly to the Hong Kong airport, you could be picked up as an associate of a terrorist.
Yep.
And we look at that and people kind of go, well, that's maybe a little far out, but go down to just the Paris Olympics. This is super recent. There was the issue with the boxer, and there's this debate right now over whether she's female or not female. But initially, the report came out very strongly and said she's not female. And people jumped on that. J.K. Rowling's, Trump, Elon Musk, these others. They were tweeting about a man that had transitioned to a woman being in women's boxing. Now, again, at least from what we can tell, maybe there's maybe more nuance to this. I don't know entirely what the situation is still. But this boxer went and filed a criminal report with Paris. In France, it's very illegal to bully or harass others based on gender and different things. They don't have the same freedom of speech that we do.
Right.
And so it's the things that were said towards this boxer are considered illegal under French law. And the French prosecutor has announced they will prosecute to the fullest extent possible, and they will seek the cooperation of other countries in holding people accountable for their online abuse through the treaties and other means that exist internationally. A lot of countries have entered into treaties that they'll help extradite criminals, they'll help share information and different things. And so you look at that and go, if you're at a business where someone else at the business said some things about this boxer online, you now don't know if you can travel to France safely.
Right.
For the rest of your life, you don't know.
Wow.
Because they could request this information from the Corporate Transparency Act from America. They don't have to notify you. America doesn't notify you if someone requests it. France can have it. They can look at it and go, we're going to go after everyone associated with this person. And they announced, again, specifically, the prosecutor said, we are going to use every means we have to bring everyone to criminal justice, whatever, and pursue charges as much as we can internationally. So I look at things like that and I say, our government is mandating that we report on each other and say who our close associates are, under the guise of, we want to track money laundering, we want to track terrorism. And I say, well, certainly I don't think any of us are for money laundering or terrorism, but if you're a money launderer or a terrorist, are you going to self-report your information to the government?
Not a chance. No.
This is only going after law-abiding citizens.
Yes.
And only the people who are afraid of breaking the law, who aren't currently, they don't want to break the law, they don't want fines. But if you're a money launderer, you know you're breaking the law. The fine of $500 a day is the least of your worries at that point.
It's the least, yeah. But it will destroy a small business owner. It will destroy
a small business owner, yes. And so again, I look at these things and I go, this is really sad. And even more sad to me with all this is there's a couple areas. I mean, there's a lot of constitutional concerns, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 10th Amendment, First Amendment concerns with the Corporate Transparency Act. But the Republicans and Democrats voted overwhelmingly for it. Not a single attorney general, to my knowledge, has filed a constitutional challenge to it. And this is the first venture that the federal government has gone into regulating ownership of entities. That's been a purely state area for over 200 years. It's a huge intrusion from a constitutional perspective into the state domain. And it's very common in Utah to hear about fighting the federal government control of lands or different things. But when the federal government actually comes in and takes a significant step into state sovereignty and state domain, which is we choose how we do our corporations here, you don't get to tell us what to do with them, we're silent.
We're silent. It's a violation.
We haven't done anything.
Movement.
And I go, why aren't we proactive on this? And why do both parties want this? That concerns me, that the parties are so silent on it.
Yeah.
And they're just, they voted for it.
They voted for it, so they're complicit. So they literally voted for it. That is terrifying. That is terrifying. It's like, what were they thinking? I know they
Yeah.
easily get duped. I know they hear the talking points, they hear the commercial, and they they sign on.
And again, maybe they felt that they needed to vote for the other things in the bill. I don't know entirely.
Right. Yeah.
But I still go, well, if they were just voting for the other things in the bill and not this, I would have thought that there'd be some AGs around the nation that would be pushing back, and there's not. And this is fascinating, because what I see happen in politics is I see the parties pick public fights that oftentimes won't go anywhere. So, for example, we fight a lot about federal control of state lands here with lawsuits against the federal government. But when Utah was made a state, it had to negotiate to become a state. It was very, for the time, it was Mormon land. There was polygamy. There was all these issues that the federal government didn't want as a state. The federal government is under no obligation to admit Utah as a state. And so Utah struck a deal with the feds and said, we'll let you control most of the lands in our state if you allow us to become a state. And so we file these lawsuits, and we kind of have these big, pomp and circumstance type shows,
Right.
but they don't do anything. And I go, but when the federal government walks in and says, hey, states, we're going to now start to regulate corporate entities, LLCs, which have been a state domain for over 200 years, as states, we just kind of go, okay.
Yeah.
And I go, whoa, this is crazy to me. But then it's even crazier to see the connection that comes when we start to look at what's happening in the state as well. So this federal law comes out, the Corporate Transparency Act comes out. And then what happens is, and this is, so I guess before I say this part, I'll step back for a second. If you look at the last bastions of liberty, or some of the strongest holds of liberty in the land, I say it's with homeschoolers and with entrepreneurs.
Definitely.
They're very, very liberty-minded, maybe some private schoolers in there too. But generally, those groups have a lot of liberty. They love to be free, to make their own decisions, to do things. And that spirit's very strong in them. And so I go, well, it's interesting that the federal government with the Corporate Transparency Act wants to now know the location, up-to-date location and association of everyone that's an entrepreneur. They're going to be checking on that. And another fact to throw out about that, large corporations don't have to comply. So once you get big enough.
Oh, yeah, if you're big, there's no concern. Yeah, you don't have to comply if you're big.
Yeah.
None of the big corporations will be going to prison for 2 years. No $500 a day fine, because they could handle it. It wouldn't put them out of business either.
Yep. But they don't have to comply. So, but you look at this and you go, okay, so we have the government now cracking down on seeking information on all the entrepreneurs at a federal level. And then you look at what's happening in Utah, and homeschooling is becoming quite popular. Homeschooling, microschooling, people are doing all different types of schools. It's really neat to see all the different things taking place. And I've worked with a fair number of co-ops and micro schools and others, and helping them get set up and going. But some of them run into resistance when they try and meet at a location, because the location is not zoned for schooling.
Right.
And so they'll say, you can't be here. And so what Utah did in this, in the legislative session, is they said, okay, homeschoolers, private schoolers, we want to give you freedom. We want to let you meet anywhere you want. And so we're going to pass a bill that says every zone is a school zone for micro schoolers, homeschool, co-ops, different things. But they said, to get that protection so that no zoning law can block you out of being able to meet wherever you want, you have to register as a corporation or LLC.
Wow.
And I go, oh, so you're going to now say that I can meet wherever I want if I register as a corporation or LLC. There's this Corporate Transparency Act that just magically happens to be in effect this year, the same year we passed that, which means that as a homeschool mom or dad, I now have to disclose all my close associates who might be able to have substantial control over this entity. And so I look at that and go, So you want to know not only the entrepreneurs, you want to know the homeschoolers too. You want to know who we all are and have up-to-date information on all our whereabouts. And I say, these things to me are far more concerning than I'm not saying that I shouldn't be concerned about the Bureau of Land Management passing new regulations on federal land.
Right.
But this type of incursion into our domain is far more concerning to me than a new Bureau of Land Management regulation. Because again, the feds have had that domain for a long time.
Yeah.
That was part of the deal to become a state. But when we talk about, oh, we're just now going to come in and regulate entities. And then in Utah, we passed this bill that says, you want protection? You can have it if you tell us all about you. And I say,
Austin, this is really,
these things are connected. I don't believe they're not connected.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't even have to put my tinfoil hat on to connect those two. I can do that without tinfoil hat. So I agree with you. That is, it just sends shivers up my spine. Because I knew about that law, when they passed that law, because there were a lot of people that were very involved in that. It wasn't one of the bills that I really worked on, but it seemed like an important one because it was really frustrating that private schools and co-ops, homeschool co-ops, why? I mean, we were so frustrated with why are they giving so much harassment and pushback on private school co-ops? So, nope, they're schools, so they have to follow all the other school guidelines, which is ridiculous. And and I think most people felt like that was a win. If I was a corporation, we're like, well, a homeschool co-op isn't a corporation and we don't treat it like one. There's not a CEO. There's not, we don't want to have to file articles of incorporation. It's just a group of parents and families getting together to homeschool their children.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how bad it was. I really didn't like it, but I didn't realize how intrusive it really was. I thought it was more for the state to control them, not the federal government as well as the state to control them.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that happy news, Austen. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. In terms of hope, we have filed a constitutional challenge to the Corporate Transparency Act. There are some businesses and groups here in Utah and in other states that have joined together. We have an active lawsuit. The federal government's due to respond by September 6th or something to it. And the Corporate Transparency Act has been challenged in other states by private citizens, again, not by attorney generals. Mm-hmm. And there is a group in Alabama that did get a judge to declare unconstitutional, but only as to the people in the case. So others still have to comply.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wow.
And so we expect litigation to go on with this for a while, but most people are in a tough spot because by the end of the year, they have to comply or risk fines. And once your information's sent over,
yes,
what do you do at that point? But
you never get your information back once they share it with foreign entities and every other government agency. How do you redact that? How do you unshare? You don't.
Yeah. There's no unsharing that takes place. So,
no unsharing.
But we're trying at least to get it struck down by the end of the year. That's the goal, and it's the goal of these other places as well. So we can pray that one of the 5 or 6 lawsuits on this succeeds by the end of the year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for jumping on this.
Yeah, and honestly, it's not as much to thank me because it actually takes more work and sacrifice on the part of all those that are paying for the lawsuit, funding it, doing all those things.
Yes.
And they're a group of people that really believe and are trying to stand up, and it's really admirable to see what they're doing. And so that's something that, again, from a liberty perspective, I think we all need to be pretty involved and watch things. Just to throw one other random fact out that I think is important for a group of Liberty moms to understand when we talk about federal control, and again, these kind of bastions of liberty, the Utah Fits All Scholarship legislation that was passed, there are 4 references in it that it says it 4 times, if you take the money, you agree to be bound by a federal law So it says specifically, anyone that takes the money agrees to be bound by this federal statute. And so what that bill does directly is it ties all homeschoolers in Utah or private schoolers that take the money directly to federal control. The feds can change this law at any time, amend it, do whatever they want with it.
Right.
And every person's agreed to be bound by that. And
what could go wrong, Austen? Like what could possibly be wrong with that?
Yeah,
It's a great bill, Austen.
These are just things that again, I'm not even talking about the whole, money side, whether
right.
it's a good or bad idea there. I'm just saying specifically on the federal incursion into regulating homeschoolers, private groups, entrepreneurs, there's a massive push at it, and sadly Utah's been complicit in this. They're creating these ties, they're doing these things, and I just say this is the protection we actually really need. We really need to have someone telling us about these things, helping to fight these things, and working on these things. Because, as you know, I grew up. I homeschooled growing up. We homeschool most of our children now, and I also have 8 children. And these are things that I do.
You have
I have 8 children.
Yeah. Austen, wow, that is amazing. You're not even old enough to have 8 children.
Well, I tell everyone you can start young.
Well, you had to be at least 21 to get home from your mission.
Yeah, had to be at least 21. But yes, no, and
get married, and then your wife had to get pregnant. So yeah, I don't know how you're pulling that off, but yes, go on.
My face and voice make me look and sound younger than I am. But
I know you look like a kid. I mean, I did not even think you could possibly be old enough to have 8 kids, or even 4. Matter.
We lived in Indiana for a time. I worked for a law firm out there that did constitutional work, and we had 3 children at that time, and everyone at church called us the high schoolers with kids. That's what they said about my wife and I.
I love it. I haven't ever met your wife, but so I was wondering. I guess your wife looks as young as you do. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we both tend to look on the young side, and my voice certainly sounds young as well. So it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't help with that impression.
That's nothing to complain about. Believe me, as someone who doesn't, I look older than I actually am. I'm on the other side. So hang on to that as long as you can. Okay. Do we have another minute? Do you have time to discuss one more topic?
Yeah. No, I've still got about a good 14 minutes.
Okay.
I can do that.
That was absolutely fascinating. And I feel like we absolutely have to do a deeper dive in there. And I feel like we do need to help. I felt like with the Utah Pitzell, I tried so hard to educate the people in favor of it, but it's hard because they're so excited, and we agree with the principle. Parents should get to choose where they send their children. They should have complete control over that. And it is frustrating as a mom who privately educated my children. I spent over $100,000 on my children's education, but I still had to pay my property taxes to pay for them to go to public school. Very frustrating, but I felt like it was worth it. And I just chose not to even engage in any of those handouts because I didn't want any of my private schools to have their hands tied with government funds. So I just personally chose, if you're going to do it, but I wish, my kids got amazing education. It was phenomenal, but I wish I would have homeschooled my kids and just gone on a couple of trips around the world and educated them that way. But that's not that I spend any time regretting, but I'm just putting that out there for parents. There's nothing like homeschooling. It's incredible. And it is a great option. And don't think you don't have time to do it, because you can absolutely homeschool your children in less time than it takes to help them do their homework after they get home from school. So just a short plug for homeschool. Okay, that was fantastic. Thank you, Austen. I want to discuss one more issue, the absolute immunity that has been discussed in the U.S. Supreme Court on Trump's decision, and how that applies to the AG's office in Utah and across the nation.
Yeah, so this was really interesting to me to watch the nation kind of be fixated on this thing of, can a president be absolutely immune from prosecution, meaning no accountability? And
any decision, no accountability, versus micromanaging every decision and accountability. Yes.
Yeah. And it's one that I think the thing that fascinated me the most was the Supreme Court came out and basically said there's absolute immunity for things that are, the core acts of the president, things that are in the Constitution. You can't, no court's going to touch them for whatever they decide on that. They then also said, and there's presumptive immunity, which means there's likely immunity if they're doing anything within the realm of being president. If it's something that's not related to president, it's just an unofficial act, then there's no immunity. Now, exactly where these lines are drawn is still kind of nebulous, and courts are still looking into that.
Right.
But the thing I think that fascinated me the most about this discussion was we were so fixated on it with the president, and we completely gloss over the fact that prosecutors in America have absolute immunity.
Absolutely. Yes.
And we don't quite grasp what that means. But when you're a parent and you get charged with a crime, and suddenly you're looking at, you go talk to an attorney and say, hey, I just got charges filed against me. So to give you an example, there was Alpine School District, Alpine School Board was holding a meeting. It was supposed to be open to the public. A bunch of parents show up to the meeting, and they decide to lock them out. They're like, we don't want to deal with them today. We lock it. That's a felony under Utah law. The AG's office didn't care about that. But parents to protest went to their cars and started honking their horns. And 2 of them, to my knowledge, get charged with the crime of disrupting a public meeting, even though the meeting was closed to the public and they were protesting an illegal action.
Outside.
And so, outside. So now you're a parent and you go, okay, I was protesting and honking my horn. There was nothing in your moral code that would say, maybe I shouldn't do this. It's not like stealing. It's not like assaulting someone or something.
Oh, yeah. Or like screaming in someone's face or banging on the door or breaking it, or like going into the meeting and just screaming and yelling at everybody, or becoming unruly and really disrupting the meeting. Right.
Yeah. But then when you now have this crime charged, you now have to decide, do I fight it or do I not? I could have some constitutional grounds to, but if I lose, if the judge disagrees with me and I have to go on appeal or to the Supreme Court, I could sit in jail for 2 years or 3 years. And then everyone has to decide, well, how principled am I? Am I willing to go to jail for this long? Well, I've got my little kids at home. I've got these other things. And the weight of a criminal prosecution is incredibly heavy. And prosecutors can charge someone without evidence, and there is no recourse you have against them. You might be able to get their charges dropped, but you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting it, doing different things, and you can't sue them. You can't hold a prosecutor liable for willful misconduct, for malicious prosecution. We had this situation of Duke lacrosse team. They were, I don't know if you remember this from 15 or so years ago, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was.
Very well, yes.
They were the national champions, and then there was a woman that alleged that the whole team gang raped her.
Yes.
And this prosecutor brought charges. All of them got kicked out of the school. All these things happened.
Destroyed their reputation. Destroyed their title. Just put all these young men just through outer darkness.
And at the end of the day, it comes to light. The prosecutor knew this was a total lie, just for publicity or re-election or whatever it was doing this. And there's no recourse. You can't sue them. You can't do these things. They have absolute immunity on when to decide to prosecute. So if they don't prosecute someone, you can't do anything about it. If they choose to prosecute someone, even without evidence, you can't do anything about it. As against them personally. Maybe their office fires them, but saying as the individual, the victim, I can't go sue them and hold them accountable. And this happened even in, I think it was Louisiana. There was a man put on death row for murder, and he got within a week, I think, of being executed. And the people, those that are against the death penalty, were working as actively as they could, trying to find things. Right. And they went to this super small town sheriff's office and digging through these old files, and they finally find proof that the prosecutor knew that everything he put on against this man was false.
Seriously?
He was doing it just to have a conviction because the community wanted a conviction. The prosecutor knowingly put a innocent man in prison on death row. And so the people were successful in getting getting the man released from prison after 30 or 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
The man sued, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't sue the prosecutor or the
Right.
prosecutor's office for these things. Absolute immunity. And I go, this is where I believe we need incredible transparency and ethics to come into the prosecutor realm. And this is why, again, on the side of the AG and cleaning things up in Utah, we just need to enforce the law. Right now, if you're buds with the prosecutor, they can choose not to prosecute you, and there's nothing we can do about it. They have absolute immunity. There's no check and balance on it.
Yeah, this is got
to be. To me, it's totally wild, and it's an abuse that says no. Everything needs a check and balance.
Everything does. Yes, you're so right.
Everything needs a check and balance. We have to put a check and balance, and this can't be, oh, you're my bud. Oh, you donated to my campaign. Yep, free pass. Right. There has to be some level of check and balance in there. And so the country was outraged. A lot of the country was outraged that Trump had absolute immunity in situations. And I go, why are we outraged that prosecutors have that?
Yeah.
There's some bad things going on, and we need to make sure that we address these things as well.
Austen, you're so brilliant, and you are such a great gift to our state, our nation, and our world. Thank you so much. Please tell us how we go on to help with your campaign. What's your website? And I'm betting, I'm pretty good on this. I'm betting you could use some funds to help with your campaign.
Yeah, so it's my website's at austenhepworth.com. You might have to type www.austenhepworth.com. Sometimes some devices struggle without the www. Yeah. I don't know why. On the campaign side, the way that I approach politics is probably different, but I believe very strongly that funds shouldn't be what wins, makes or breaks an election.
I so agree with you.
So the main thing I ask people to do is to say, share it with 2 people.
Okay.
And then ask them to share it with 2 people. It only takes 20 passes of sharing it with 2 people to reach 1 million people. And 20 passes is not difficult. We can do that. Facebook won't shut us down if we call up a friend and say, hey, listen to this video or consider voting for this person and share it with 2 people. And I really feel strongly that we can do that, and that's the way that we need to work on our country. If we put our faith in money, the government will regulate money, it will control it. We have to put our faith in people, community connection, and go that way. So you can donate on the website, but it's not, I'm certainly not operating a campaign with money as the main source of faith or foundation for it, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally.
But we'd love to have you. And there's information you can read about the Corporate Transparency Act lawsuit there. You can read about some of the other issues that are going on. You can read about, we didn't get to talk today about the Utah Supreme Court case that has made kind of a veto-proof ballot initiative, which is a big concern.
Which is a huge issue, and I definitely want to have you on again to talk about that because it's huge.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of information about that and potential solutions, paths forward with that as well. So that's all there.
Great.
And then people can reach out to me as well.
Yeah, I will go read that because I would like to get your take on that. And we're looking at some options of how we can fix that and how we can work around it. So I will go read your brilliant summary of that. And Austen, I just want to tell you thank you so much. Very fascinating. We do look forward to having you on and wish you all the best. And I will be sharing this with more than 2 people. So that is a great way to get your word out and let people know that you're running and that you're an option and that we can have a very principled and very intelligent and articulate AG in the state of Utah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dalane. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending this time. You have a great day. And stay with us. We will be back in a minute. We have another Liberty Mom that will be joining us soon, and that is Dr. Jen Brown. So stay with us. Thanks, Austen.